Entire neighborhood in Gaza are in shambles after Israel launched hundreds of overnight airstrikes. And Israel has also imposed a total siege, cutting off food, water and power supply. For more insights on the humanitarian implications, we're joined by Jason Hart. He is the Professor of Humanitarians and Development at the University of Bath. Professor, thanks for joining us. Good to have you with us. Would you consider the siege on Gaza, denying them food, water and fuel, a war crime? And if so, what can be done to hold Israel to account?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I would describe the situation of blockade and the denial of access to water, food and basic supplies as a severe violation of international law. As to how it can be addressed, I think we need to see very quickly a turnaround in the actions and the speech of political leaders, certainly here in Europe and North America, who have thrown their lot in entirely with Israel, offering unconditional support, overlooking the atrocities now being committed against civilians in Gaza, and as I mentioned, actions that constitute war crimes. So they need to take a much more balanced approach, to start to operate like honest brokers and to push for an immediate ceasefire and cessation of hostilities from all sides.
Now, at this point, what has been the impact, from your perspective, of Israel's blockade on Palestinians in Gaza, even to the extent of bombing Rafah, the border crossing, the one crossing that they don't control between Egypt and the Gaza Strip?
Well, the effect is absolutely devastating. I mean, people are living in terror. This is state terrorism. We need to be absolutely clear in calling it for what it is. People are terrorized. People have nowhere to flee to. There isn't a safe space anywhere in Gaza that people can go to and feel anyway safe. Schools have been hit. Hospitals are overrun. Civilian infrastructure is being destroyed systematically. This is a bloodbath, and there needs to be a proper response from the international community to call it out and to insist that Israel steps back and starts to observe international law. Without that, then our leaders have no credibility when it comes to talking about human rights and international law in any other context, if they're not willing to step up here when we can see very, very clearly how human rights are being violated systematically.
Now, in addition to that, there's now the threat of a ground attack in Gaza. What hope is there for Palestinians trapped in the area, and how likely is there a point where a humanitarian corridor is allowed?
Well, I don't know how likely a humanitarian corridor is allowed. I think the West has greenlit Israel to go in and commit effectively genocide, against a population that has nowhere to flee to, and no separation being made between militants and civilians and so on. So, the prospects are devastating. And with the invasion of ground forces, if that indeed happens, the killing will just get magnified, 10 times over. This is horrendous. And it is truly shocking. I say that as a British citizen. It is truly shocking to see how the media in our country, to see how the politicians in our country are completely blind, completely unwilling to attend properly and call out Israel for what it is doing in Gaza. This is something that will go down in history, I think, as a moment of profound shame, should go down. We should really be discussing it in those terms. We should be asking all people of good conscience, all people who desire peace and the rights of all to live with dignity and respect, should be calling out Israel, demanding that it steps back and observes international law. And of course, the same applies absolutely to Hamas and anybody on the Palestinian side that also engages in the killing and the maiming and the destruction of civilians and civilian life.
Now, Professor, along with the casualties on both sides of this conflict, there is also the issue of people displaced. What can be done to address the rising number of people displaced?
Well, I have no doubt that the humanitarian organizations still operating in Gaza, including the UN, will be doing everything they can to try and accommodate the displaced. I know, for example, that the UN schools have become places that have been opened up as emergency accommodation. But even then, we're hearing reports of schools being hit. So as I said before, there is nowhere safe to go to. The idea of, leaving in search of sanctuary in the context of Gaza, when as you've said, the only crossing into Egypt is being bombed more than once. There is no safe space. There is nowhere to achieve sanctuary. It's horrific, absolutely horrific.
Well, many thanks for your insights, Professor Jason Hart, speaking to us live from Bath, England.